in the chat if you were able to finish them, or you can also ask the questions we have, because we can go over some problems together if we need to.
So they're asking, is it a homework or the test?
Oh, the homework. Were they able to finish the homework?
So they did the test.
Oh, they completed the test? Did all...
Yeah, they said first 20 questions.
Oh, they finished up to the first 20 questions of the test?
Yes.
Okay, then I'll go ahead and we'll go over the answers together then for those first 20. Okay, can you guys see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so we'll start with the first one. So we want to evaluate result. Let me see if I can... No. So we can start with exponents. So we can see that here we have 2 to the 3 because we have 2 multiplication signs. So that becomes... That'll become 8. Oops. Okay, so So 2 to the times 3 is the same thing as 2 to the 3. So it's gonna become 8. And if we do 8 divided by 6, we know that if there's 2 division signs, that means that the answer will be an integer. So if we do 8 divided by 6, usually it will be like 1.3333, because it's not a whole number when you divide 8 by 8 and 8 divided by 6. But since we have 2 division signs, it's going to become an integer. So the answer will just be 1. And next we can do 1 modulus 5. And modulus means that we're getting the remainder. So if we do 1 divided by 5, our remainder will be 1. So that'll be our answer. And then we do 1 plus 8 minus 2. So that will be 9 minus 2, which is equal to 7. So our first answer is going to be D. Okay. Okay, so our next question, we have 2 lists. So one of them is called N1 and it has 10, 20, 30, 40, and 50. And our second list is N2 and it has 10, 20, 30, 40, and 50. So the first statement asks if N1 is N2, and is not the same thing as equals equals. So if it's asking if it has the same location. So if it's stored under the same variable or in the same location. So since N1 has these values, and N2 has a separate set of values, it's not N1 is set to N2, then that means that N1 is N2 will be false because they're not in the same location, stored in the same location. But if we look at N1 equals N2, when we have the 2 equal signs, it's just when we're comparing lists, it's just seeing if we have the same exact values inside of these. The same. So the lists are equal to each other in terms of the items that are in it. So the second one would be true. So that means our answer will be C. So the first print statement is false and the second one is true. Okay. And if you guys have any questions, you guys can feel free to ask. Okay, so our next question has a string that has A, B, space, C, D. And by using the list method, we're going to make S into a list. So it's going to become a list like, so bracket A, here, let me try. So it will be split into A, B, space. It splits every character into one item of a list. So even the space has its own is its own value in the list. C and D. So this is our list from right here. And if we do list.append EF, remember the append method adds whatever value we put inside of here to the very end of the list. So it's just going to add it as exactly how it's given. So it'll just be EF. These won't be separated. You're just going to add it at the very end of the list exactly how they put it. So our and then we're going to print the list. So our result will be this one, D, because even though some of these may look similar, they're in the same format. Remember that a list always has square brackets. So you can see here that this one has squiggly brackets. That is incorrect. This one has parentheses. That is also incorrect. It must have square brackets to be a list. Okay. So our next problem is also a math problem. So we want to start with the parentheses. Okay, so we'll start with the first parentheses. So 3 plus 4 will be 7. The 2, 7. And then next we'll have times 2 minus, and then we have our next parentheses. So 3 and the 2 multiplication signs means you're doing it to the power. So 3 to the power of 3 will be 27. And then that will also be times 3. So next we can simplify starting here. So 7 to the power of 2 will be 49. And so then we can do 2 times 49, which should be 98, minus 27 times 3, which is 81. So if you do 98 minus 81, you should get 17, which is the answer. So this here. Okay. So our next question, we'll look at these 3 code segments. So the first one, so we want to see the result types. So you can see that the first one, we initially have a string, and then we have another variable that has an integer, and we do a1 times b1. So that's a string times an integer. And if you do this, remember that it will actually print out like this. So if we do this times 3, sorry, these look a little funky. It will just add it 3 times like this. So our result will just look like this. So it'll just put 10 3 times together as a string. So that means our first code segment will be a string. And then our second one, it's an integer. A2 is an integer. B2 is also an integer. And we do 10 divided by 3. And remember that if you only have one division sign, it's going to be a float. So it'll be around like 3.3 something. It'll be a float number because it only has one division sign. And then our third code segment, it's going to be 2.6, which is a float. Divided by 1, which, since it's also just a division sign, just one division sign, it's also going to be a float, our answer. So you can see that our first answer is a string, our second is a float, and our third is also a float. So our answer is going to be A. Okay. So for this next question, we want to make our value 9. So it's asking which expression out of these answers do we need to make the number 9. So we can see that A starts at 2. And in our second line, we add 1 to A. So A becomes 3. And we want to make A equal 9. So we can see that if we do A minus equals 2, we're doing 3 minus 2, which equals 1. If we do A times equals 2, it will be 3 to the power of 2, which equals 9. If we do 3 times equals 2, it will be 3 times 2, which will be 6. And if we do A plus equals 2, it will be 3 plus 2, which is going to be 5. So we want to make our value 9, so we can see that we need it to be answer choice B to be correct. Okay. So I'll move on to question 7. So for Booleans, how this works is when you assign it with the Boolean method around it, whatever is inside the parameter is equal to true unless it is 0 or it's empty. So you can see here that since this has a value of 0, this you just kind of need to memorize. When you do bool 0, it's going to be false. If you do any other number, though, it will be true. So 3 will be true. And 0.5, even though it has a 0, it's actually 0.5, not 0. So it will be true as well. And if you do 0.0, it is also going to be false because your answer cannot, if it's 0, then it will be false. So we can see that it asks which variables represent true. So we can see that B is true and C is true. So our answer will be C. So you should remember that if you have a Boolean function, and parentheses, and inside you have 0, that will be false. It's also the same thing if you have Boolean with an empty list or a string. So if you just have this, it will also be false. Or like we learned lists, if you have a list but it doesn't have anything in it, it will also be false. But if you have like a string that has 0, it's going to be true. And if you have inside your list, you have a value that's 0, it's still going to be true because your list is not empty. It has a value item that is 0. But the list itself has an item in it. So this is actually going to be true. Okay. Okay, so this is similar to one of the questions we just did. But first, we see that numbers is a list that has the values 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, which are all integers. And alphabets has strings A, B, C, D, E. And both of them are lists. So the first print statement, it asks if numbers is alphabets. And they're clearly the values are stored in different locations. Especially so you can see one being integers and one being string. So this is going to be false. And our second one, we see if numbers equals alphabets. So this one, when it's equals, you just check if the values are the same. But 10 is not equal to A, 20 is not equal to B, 30 is not equal to C, 40 is not equal to D, and 50 is not equal to E. They're all different values, so it's also going to be false. And after this, you see that numbers equals alphabets, which means that you're putting the value of that's stored in alphabets, the list in alphabets, and numbers is actually going to hold the same thing as well. So numbers is now going to be A, B, C, D, E. It's not going to have these numbers anymore. So then, if you compare numbers is alphabets, you can see that numbers equals alphabets. So they're actually storing an item or a list in the same location. So this will be true. And then next, you can also see if numbers equals alphabets. And since numbers now also has A, B, C, D, E, it's the same as alphabets. So this will also be true. So we can see that our answer will be false, false, true, true. So A would be the best answer. Okay, so in this question, it says that you're developing a Python application for your company. A list name employees contains 500 employee names, the last 3 being company management. Which of the following represents only management employees? So you want to find the ones that are only management employees, and they tell you that it's the last 3 in the list. So we can see that if we call a list like this, employees, and then we do 497, and then you do a colon with no number, it will go from 497 to the end. And if you do 500 minus 497, you know that it's 3. So 497 is 3 away from the very end of the list. So it is indeed the last 3. So this will work. And then we can see here, if we do 497 to 500, it will be, it'll start from 497, and then it will include 498 and 499, which are the last 3 employees. It doesn't count 500. But since that is the last 3 of the list, that also works. And then you can see this one has a negative index. So it has -3 and it goes to the end. So if it has a negative index, you count from the very back. So you know that this is 3 from the end. So it would be the very end of the list. The very last element would be -1. The second to last is -2. And the third to last is -3. So those are the last 3 if you start from -3. So this also works as well. So since all 3 of these work, the answer will be C, all of the above. Okay, so our next problem, it's also you're developing a Python application for your company, and a list name employees contains 600 employee names, the last 3 being company management. You need to slice the employees to display all the employees excluding management. So this time it's going to be everything but the last 3. Which of the 2 code segments, which 2 code segments should we use? So we want to include everything except the very last 3. So if you want to start from the very beginning, actually, let's just look at all the answer choices. So the first answer choice, you see it starts at index 1, which is already wrong because you want to start from 0 all the way to 597 in order to get everything except the last 3. Remember that in a list, the index, the first index, or the first element in the list is actually index 0, not 1. So this will actually skip the first value in the list, so this does not work. We can look at this one. It starts from 0, so that is good. And it ends at -3, which is 3 from the end. So that means that the last 3 won't be included. So this will actually work. The next one, like I said earlier, it starts at 1, which would exclude the very first value, which is something that you actually want to display. So this will also be wrong, even though it has the very last index correctly. This one, it starts at 0, so it will start from the very beginning, but it ends at -2, which would be the last 2 in the last 2 employees would only be excluded, and the third employee would not be excluded. So it wouldn't be the last 3, it'd be the last 2. So this one also doesn't work. And this one, you can see that it just starts with a colon, which means it starts from the very beginning of the list, which is good. And then it ends at the third employee. So the last three are excluded. So that means that this would also work. Okay. So the next one, we have a Python code like this. We're assigned A is 1, B is 3, C is 5, and D is 7. So in which of these following cases would the result value be 0? So we can just try all of these. If we do the first one, we start with the division. So first, I'll just replace them all as numbers. 1 minus 3 divided by 7. And if we do 3 divided by 7, since it will be an integer, if we do that, it will be 0. So it will be 1 minus 0. So then the answer would equal 1. The next one we can do, I'll replace them. So A is 1 plus B is 3, and then times 2. So we can start with 3 times 2 first. So 3 times 2 will be 6. So 1 plus 6, which will be 7. The next one we'll do 1, 2 times D, which is 7. Oops. And it will be minus 1. So if we do 1 to the power of 7, it will just be 1, and then it will be 1 minus 1. So that will equal to 0. And we want the result to value to equal 0. So this one is correct. And then our last option, we have 1 modulus, and then 3 minus 1. So if we do 1 modulus 3, it's going to find the remainder when we do 1 divided by 3. So the remainder is going to be 1. And if we do 1 minus 1, it's also going to be 0. So for this one, answer choices C and D are correct. Okay. So in our next question, we want to find which of the following won't print cat on the console. So we can see the first one, x index 2, so it will be 0, 1, 2. So start with R. And then y of 1, so 0, 1. P. And then z of 1, so 0, 1, O. And then we'll see our next example, it's x index -5. So we can start from the back and count. So -1, -2, -3, -4, -5. So we'll get C. And then y index 0 is going to be A. And then z index 0 is going to be t. Our next one, x to the negative fifth, or x index negative 5, negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, negative 4, negative 5. It's also c, like the one we just did. And then y index 0 is a. I'll just write. And then z index negative 2 will start from the back, so negative 1, negative 2. So it will be t. And then lastly, we'll look at index or x index 1, so 0, 1, z. And then y index 0 is a. And z index 0 will be t. So after looking at these options, you can see that the one that isn't cat is the first one. Okay. So we're looking at the expression result equals a minus b times c plus d, and we want to see which of the following are valid. So the first statement says that the above expression is equivalent to a minus b times c in parentheses plus d. And we can see that this is true because even if we solve it this way, we will start with b times c since we're following the order of operations. So with parentheses or without parentheses, we're going to be starting with b times c and then doing the other expressions from left to right. So this will be correct. Then we can see the second expression or second answer. It says that first b times c will be evaluated. So we know that's true because we will start with multiplication and it will be evaluated followed by addition and subtraction. So we're going to start after we do the multiplication, we're going to start left to right. So we'll actually do subtraction before addition. So this will not be correct. And instead, this one will be correct because we start with subtraction and then addition. And this one has the same choice as first b times c and then subtraction addition. And then the last one we can see, it says that first a minus b will be evaluated followed by multiplication and addition. So this one we know is not true because we'll actually start with b times c instead of a minus b. We don't go just from left to right, we follow the order of operations, so this will be incorrect. So our answers will be A and C. Oh yeah, sorry, I just saw Justin's question. So let me go back real quick to question 10. Okay, so this one, the question is, can negative indexing be put in the same segment with the positive index? Yeah, so since this, yeah, you can do that because it will just start from 0 and then you'll, the end, instead of doing 597, you can just do -3. So yes, you can do this. And let me go back. Okay, so now we are on question 15, and we're doing consider the code. So A is 15 and B is 5, and we're printing A divided by B. So that's 15 divided by 5. And remember that if it's just a single division sign, it's going to be a float. So even though 15 divided by 5 does not have, it's fully divisible and it doesn't have any remainder, instead of just equaling 3, it will actually be 3.0 because it only has one division sign. So the answer will be A. If it was 15, oops. If the question had 15 divided by 5, then it will be equal to 3. So you just need to remember that one division sign means that it will be a float, even though it may not have a remainder. It'll just be 3.0. And if it has two division signs, it'll just be an integer, even if it has a remainder. So even if I did 16 divided by 5, it will still be 3, because even though 16 divided by 5 is 3 point something something, since it has two division signs, it will just be an integer. So for this problem, our answer is A. Okay. So for this question, you are writing a Python program that evaluates an arithmetic expression. The expression is described as b is equals a multiplied by -1, then raised to the second power, where a is the value which will be input and b is result. So it says that which of the following is valid expression for the given requirement. So we want b to be equal to a times -1, which will be -a. And then after we multiply it by -1, we want it to be raised to the second power. So it will be times 2 in order to be the second power. So if we see that, so for this problem, we're just following what they described in words. We want to make it an expression. And we can see that our answer would be C. So this one, you need to make sure that you put the negative sign in front, so it's multiplying. This would just, I think it would give a syntax error because it's the minus sign is after. And this one, it would do a to the power of 2 before the negative sign, but you want it to multiply by -1 before you raise it to the second power. And for D, you don't want to raise it to the power of -2 because that'll be a totally different number than raising it to the power of 2. And you want A to be negative, not the power. So the correct answer for this one is C. Okay. So number 16, we have this Python code here that has a list in numbers that stores the values 10, 20, 30, and 40, and x equals 0. So we want to look at these, at our answer choices and see which one will print 10. Here, let me do this to make it bigger. Okay. So we want to make the output print 10. So we can look at this for loop. We learned for loops yesterday. So for I in 30, 40, 50, if so it's going to start by, I is going to start by being 30, and then it'll be 40, and then 50 every time you go through the for loop. So if I is in numbers, so if you do in, it means it searches numbers, which is this list, and sees if this value I is inside of it. So we can start with 30. So is 30 in numbers? Yes, it'll be right here. 30's in numbers. So it says if it's in numbers, then you do x equals x plus 10. So which means that right now x will equal 10. And then you will go around back into the for loop, and I will now be 40. So since I is 40, you check if 40 is in numbers. You can see that 40 is in numbers. That is true. So then you add 10 again. So now x will be 20. And then and then you go again back into the for loop, and you see if I will become 50, and you see if 50 is in numbers. 50 is not in numbers, which means that it will not go inside this if statement. So we do not add 10. And since we're done with the for loop, we went through all the values. We're going to print x and if you print it, it will be 20, which is not the correct value. We want it to be 10. The next option, same thing. So the for loop runs to 30, 40, 50, and this time we're checking if it's not in numbers. So this one is 30 in numbers, So we start with I being 30, and if 30 is not in numbers, then we add 10. But 30 is in numbers, so it will not go in here. So x is 0 after this. And then we will go again with 40. And if 40 is not in numbers, then we'll add 10. But 40 is also in numbers. So we're still 0. And then we'll go again with 50. If 50 is not in numbers, then we'll add 10. This time, 50 is not in numbers, you can see. So we'll add 10. And then since we're done with the for loop, we'll print x, which is 10. And we wanted our answer to be 10, so this is correct. And then our next answer choice, we'll start with I being 30, and it's in numbers, so then we'll add 5. 40, it's also in numbers, so we'll add 5 again, and it will become 10. And then we go to 50, and it's not in numbers, so it won't go in this if statement, and we're done with the for loop, so we'll print x, which is 10, which is also correct. And then our last option, we want to see if 30 is not in numbers, which is false. 30 is in numbers, so we won't go in this if statement, and we'll go to 40, so x will be 0. We'll go to 40. If 40 is not in numbers, that is also false, so x will still be 0. And 50, if 50 is not in numbers, that is true because 50 is not in numbers. So we add 5, and x equals 5, which is not 10. So we can see that our correct answers are B and C. Okay. So for this one, we have 2 inputs. One is given to start and one is given to end. So it asked how old were you at the time of joining, and it asked how old are you today. So we want to print a congratulations method, and we want to see which one we can actually print. So the first one, you see that you do end minus start and cast it to a string. But if we just do input like this, then start and end will already be strings. So if we do end minus start, that will actually not work because you can't subtract strings. So this one is incorrect. The next one, it does end minus start and cast it to an int. But same thing, before it's casted to an integer, it's still a string. So inside of here, when it does end minus start, it's still a string. So since we can't subtract strings, here it will also be wrong. Next here, in the third one, you can see that it casts each end and start to integer. Here and here. They're both cast before you subtract. So that means end will be an integer and start will be an integer. So an int minus an int is valid, and it's still an integer. So it becomes an integer, and then we cast it back to a string. So this message will print correctly. Now, if you look here, it looks the same. So we cast int before subtracting, which works, but our answer will be an int. Oops. Our answer will be an int because we didn't cast it to string like here. And actually, we can't add strings with integers in Python. You can't combine them. So this will be wrong. So that is why this one works, because you need to cast it back to a string after it's an integer in order to have it on this message. Okay. So question 18, we want to see which one will generate the max value. So we want to see which which of these answer choices will give us the biggest number. So we can start this one, 8 modulus 3. If we do that, so if we do 8 divided by 3, then we'll have, here, we'll have, okay, if you do 8 divided by 3, you'll get 2 with a remainder of 2. So our remainder will be 2. And it will be 2 times 4. Which will equal to 8. And then our next one is 8 divided by 3. And this one will be just one division sign. So it will be a float. So our answer will be about 2 point, let's just round to 6, 7 right now. But it will be just a float. So it will actually keep going, and then we'll times that by 4. So we know it will be bigger than this. It will be around 10.67. And then our next one, we can start here. 3 times 4 will be 12. So it will be 8 minus 12. And that will get you -4, which is the smallest so far. And then our last one, we do 8 divided by 3. But we have 2 division signs, so this time it's going to be an integer, so it'll just be 2. And it'll be times 4. So if we do 2 times 4, it will be 8. And we want to find the max value, so we can see that B will be our biggest answer. Okay. And question 19, we are developing a Python application for your company. A list name employees contains 500 employee names, and in which case will we get index error while accessing employee data? So here you can see it goes from 1 to 1,000. So it wants us to find when there will be an error. But in Python, if you have a colon, it will actually, even though clearly there's only 500 employee names in the list, and this is 1,000, which shouldn't exist. It will, since it has a colon, it will actually just get up to 500. It just assumes that it will go up to whatever max index you have. So even though it's 1,000 and it won't go to index 1,000, it's actually still works. So it doesn't get an index error. And same with these as well. Even though this one as well, since this one is also in range, it's not above 500 or below 500. it also works. And you can see here, same thing. So even though it's 501, that's actually just getting up, that will be from 0 to 500, which is in range, and also it won't go out of bounds since it has a colon, or it won't get an index error. So for this one, the answer will be none of the above. Okay, so I'll move on to our last question. So it says, consider the code. We have a variable s, which has a string Python is easy, and s1 gets the string from index -7 to the end. So that's going to be, let's see, -7 is -1, -2, -3, -4, -5, -6, -7. So it's going to be is easy because it starts from -7 and it goes to the end. And then S2 is going to be S index -4 to the end. So that is going to be -1, -2, -3, -4. So it's just going to be easy. And it's telling us to print S1 plus S2. So it's just going to add this at the end, S2 at the end of S1. So our answer will be is easy, easy. So our answer will be B. Okay, so if you look at these answer choices, this one, it's not true since it doesn't start at the right index. This one, we don't have a space between easy and the second easy because remember that this was index -4, not here, not the space. So when you add it, it won't add a space in between. So it will actually just be connected like this. Same with this one, you actually need a space between is and easy because you are getting it from here all the way to the end. So you're keeping it exactly how it is here. So it will have a space after easy. And this one is incorrect because -7, the starting index includes the index -7, so I will be included. So for this one, B is correct. Yeah, so you guys can see we've gotten to where you guys said you guys have done up to. So today, you guys probably be doing the rest of it for home as a test as well. And you guys can see how many you got right and send it in the chat right now. Okay, so you guys can check all your answers and you can send it in the chat. And then after that, David can take over with our lecture. They didn't really have any questions on coding that, so I think we can go straight to the lecture instead, which is on scope and dates.
Okay. Should I use VS Code or online Python?
I think either would be fine. Or you can just show it on there as well, but if they can't
Yeah.
see the side, then you can just use online Python. Whichever's easier for you.
Okay, so in Python, there's something called a scope, which is basically so if you have a variable, how to explain this? So sometimes a variable is only like available like within the local scope, which I'll get to later. So there's the local scope and there's the global scope. So let's start with local scope. So a variable created inside a function belongs to the local scope of the function and can be only used within that function. So over here, so x is created within the function myfunc. So you can use the variable x within the function. So print x is within the function. So since variable x is created within this function, you can use it inside the same function, but you can't use it outside the function. So if you try to use like x outside the function, like here, um, so yeah, so x equals 300, print x. Um, so again, x is declared within the function, myfunc. So you can use the variable, you can access it, you can modify it, you can read it within the same function. So print x prints 300. But if you try to access x outside the function, so so right here, I'm trying to access the variable x outside the function, and it throws an error because x is not defined. So x is only defined within the local scope. So just inside this function, it's not defined outside the function. So therefore, you cannot access x outside the function. So in Python, you can have functions inside other functions. Um, so the local variable can be accessed from a function within the function. So there's two functions here, myfunc and myInnerfunc. Um, so if you declare a variable, oh, okay. So I'll just redo this example. Okay, so x is defined, x is created within the function myfunc. So you can use it, you can access it, you can modify it, you can read it within the same function. So x equals 300, print x. So that prints 300 because you can access the variable within the function since it was created inside the function. But if you try to access x outside the function, so outside the local scope, um, so if I try to print x here, the x over here, then it throws an error because x is defined within the local scope. So you cannot access it outside the function. So over here, you have a function inside a function. So you have two functions. The outer function is called myfunc, and the function inside it, the function inside the function myfunc, is called myInnerFunc. And in this case, x is created within the first function, so myfunc, and then you define a second function inside the original function. So you can access the variable created inside the first function because the variable is, even though it's created within a local scope, it's still okay, so I'll just show you guys. So x is defined here, x equals 300, and then you define another function called myInnerFunc within this function. So since this part is all within this function, and since x is created within this function, you can access it within myInnerFunc, which is inside this function, because x is defined within the first function. So you can access it within the function inside the function that the variable was created. But okay, let's say you try to define a variable within myInnerFunc. So this throws an error because you created a variable inside a function. So basically, you can't access a variable outside the function. So again, the reason why you can access the variable x is because it's predefined outside the function, like within the same scope as this function. Sorry if it's hard to understand. It's better to explain it after I explain the global scope. So that's the local scope. When a variable is created inside a function, that belongs to the local scope. And the second scope is called the global scope, which is when a variable is created in the main body of the Python code. So outside a function, like outside any function. So over here, you define x outside the function myfunc, and you try to access the variable inside the function. So this variable is created outside this function, so therefore it is global and can be used by anyone. So it can be used by inside other functions because the variable is created outside of the function, so it's global. So over here, you can see that you can access x from within the function myfunc, and you can also access it within the global scope, so outside any function, as usual. So yeah, so as usual, you can access it since it's outside every function, but you can also access it from anywhere, so inside a function, and even inside a function inside a function, because the variable is global. So let me explain this better a bit. So in relation to this function, x is sort of global. So just forget this part, and let's say that the code starts here. So if you think about it that way, then x is a global variable, so you can access it from inside a function, considering this as its own scope. So naming variables, if you operate with the same variable name inside and outside a function, Python would treat them as two separate variables, one in the global scope, which means outside the function, and one in the local scope, so inside the function. So over here, you define x, you create a variable x equal to 300 in the global scope, outside the function. But you also create it inside the local scope, so inside the function myfunc. So you defined x two times. So x equals 300 and x equals 200. So how does it know? How does Python know which value to print? Um, I guess it's easier if I show you guys. Um, so the global variable initially is 300, x equals 300. And uh, so x equals 200 inside the function in the local scope. So let's say this wasn't here. So x equals 200 wasn't there. Let me just comment this. So if that wasn't there, then x equals 300 as in the global scope. But if you include that line, then x is overwritten. X is overwritten inside the local scope only, uh, and it doesn't affect the global scope because it's inside a function. So it just overwrites x within the local scope. So as you can see, when you print x in the global scope, so outside the function, x is still 300. So even though you set x to 200 over here, it only affects the local scope, so inside the function, and it doesn't affect the global scope. And the second thing, the other thing about scopes is the global keyword. Am I going too fast? You guys should probably try this out in VS Code. I'll just continue. So in Python, there's a global keyword. So if you need to create a global variable, but you want to do it inside a function instead of outside, then you can use the global keyword, which makes the variable global. So normally, if you define x inside the function, so inside the local scope, then you can't access it from the global scope outside the function, but you can use the keyword global x, which makes it the variable x global, so that you can access it from outside the local scope. So from the global scope outside the function. So let's say you remove the line global x, then it throws an error because even though x is defined, it's only defined within the local scope, so inside the function and not outside. So it cannot be accessed from outside the function. But with this line, global x, you can make the x global so that it can be accessed outside the function. So you guys can try this. As always, let us know if you have any questions, and if you're done, type it in chat. I'll just continue. So let's say X is predefined, is created in the global scope, so outside any function. Um, and normally you can't change the value of the global X from within a function, right? But using global X, you can actually change the value of X in the global scope. Okay, so normally, if you define X as 300 and you try to set X to 200 within a function, and you try to print it from outside the function, then it's still 300 because the value of X is it only affects the local scope, so only within a function. But if you include global X, then you can make this X global, um, which means that it can change the value of the global X. So without global X, it just prints 300. But if you put that in, then it prints 200. You guys can try this out. So again, the reason why you can change the value of X from within the function is because global X, the keyword global, um, it changes the scope of the variable X to global, which means that um, it can change the value of it uh, in the global scope, so outside the function. I'll just continue, I guess. Um, so in Python, there's something called Modulus. Um, so I'll explain what it is. So what is a modulo? Consider a modulo to be the same as a code library. So it's a file containing a set of functions that you want to include in your code. So so let's say there's another file called mymodulo.py, which contains the function greeting and code inside it. So you can save this separate file as mymodulo.py. So that's the stuff we learned. So writing a function, receiving an argument, and putting code inside it. So you can save it as another file name, and then from your main. Oh, okay. So let's do dates before we do modulo. So in Python, date is not a data type of its own. So we learned that string, Boolean, integer, float, those are data types defined in Python. So those are Python data types, but dates are not its own data type. So in order to use dates in Python, you import a module called datetime to work with date objects. Um, so you import datetime, which is a modulo. It contains its own code. So it has a method called datetime.now, which gets the current time. So you kind of have to memorize that datetime.datetime.now, and then parentheses, so that you run the function, and then you get a date object. So as you can see, a date is printed. You guys can try this out. Okay, I'll continue. So if you execute this, you get something like this, like what I got from here. So year, month, day, time. So it returns a lot of information about the current time. But what if you just want like the year or the day? Like, what if you just want the time? Um, so X is a datetime object. It's a date object from the datetime modulo. So even though X might seem like a string, um, it's actually not. It's actually a date object, which has attributes. Um, so it's not a string. It's actually a date object with attributes and methods. So you can do things like x.ear, and you can just get the ear, and this is a bit more complicated, but you can get the day using this. Um, so datetime.datetime.now, it gets the current time. But if you want to create a date, a custom date, um, you can use datetime.datetime instead of datetime.datetime.now. So if we try this, we can create a date object that indicates 2020 May 17th. So as you can see, the object is created. So X in both scenarios So X stores the date object for both X's, but this one gets the current time based on your clock. And this one, you can create like a custom date object, like of a specific time that you want to create. Um, so strings like this, maybe not that. So strings like this is a bit hard for humans to understand, right? You'd rather have it like in human readable format, like year 2022, June instead of '06, so that it's more human readable. To do this, we use a common method called strf time, which takes one parameter format, which is a string. So you pass a string inside the method to specify the format of the return string. So over here, we set x to a date object pointing to 2018 June 1st. And if we print x dot strf time percent capital B, we get June. So if you just print the date object, you get this string, which is now very human readable. So you can use methods like strf time to make it more human readable and extract like just the informations that you want. So these are all the parameters that you can pass to strf time. Uh, so for example, percent lowercase a is the weekday, the short version of the weekday, and notice how it's case sensitive. So percent lowercase a returns something different than percent lowercase, capital A. So lowercase a returns the short version, like wed, that's short for Wednesday, and capital A returns the full day, so Wednesday. There's a lot of parameters that you can pass, so these are all the valid ones. So notice how from here, like from just the date object, you can get so much information from it in many different formats. So if you just want to U, then you can do that percent capital Y. You can also get the short version. So instead of 2018, you can just get 18. So notice how there's so much data that you can get just from a single data object. So you guys can play around with it for a bit. So let's say I just want the month. So like that. Oh, that's already done. So I get June, right? There's a lot of things you can do. Like if you just want the number um, for the month, '06, representing June. So that's STR time. It's really cool. You can do all this um, with just the date objects. And yeah, so that's dates. I think I'm done.
Okay, then Hamasu can go ahead and do math.
Yeah.
Start with math. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All right. Can you guys see my screen?
Yeah.
All right, we're gonna get started with some math in Python. So there's obviously the operations we talked about before, which were like addition and subtraction and multiplication. But now we're getting to things that are more specific in math. So yeah, so Python has a bunch of built-in math functions. And then it also has a math module that we have to import if we want to use, but it allows us to like perform a lot of different mathematical tasks. And like two of them that are pretty simple are the min and max functions. And these are basically just used to find the lowest or highest. And then an iterable is that includes like the list you guys learned a few days ago, I think. And we can test this out. Let me pull out the online compiler. So if we wanted to test this out, we can try x equals min, and then let me zoom in a little for you guys. 5, 10, and 25. Let's try printing it out. You can see 5 got printed out because out of 5, 10, and 25, 5 is the minimum value, right? And now let's create a variable called y, and let's set it to max 5, 10, 25. And then we're going to print y. You can see our x prints out first, which we set to the minimum of these numbers, which is 5. And then y we set to the maximum of these numbers, which is 25. And so both of these are printing out correctly. And let's move on to the next function. This one is ABS, and this stands for absolute. And if you don't know what an absolute value is, any number or float you put in, it's going to give you the positive value. So if you put in negative 7.25 like this, let's see what happens. So x equals ABS, negative 7.25. And then we can print out x. You can see that it prints out 7.25 and it's positive. And if we just put in the positive 7.25 and we find the absolute value of that, I'm sure you guys know that math absolute value would make 7.25 into just 7.25 again. And we can test out a bunch of different numbers like 15, negative 15, and that's going to give us 15. So yeah, it's just the absolute value of a number. And then we have the power function. And this one we might have used before, but I'm not sure if we did, for the area of the circle. In case you forgot, POW parentheses, and then you want x, or so if you want x to the power of y, you want power. The first thing is the base, and the second number is the exponent. So you can see pow of x and y in this order is going to give us x to the power of y like this. And so we can put in some numbers like 2 and 3. And if anyone knows what 2 to the power of 3 is, it's going to be 8, because 2 times 2 times 2. 2 times 2 is 4, 4 times 2 is 8. And then we can test this out. Let's try 4 to the power of 3, as they give here. 4 to the power of 3. That's 64. As you know, 4 times 4 is 16, times 4 is 64. So hopefully that makes sense. And these are the main ones. The rest of them are going to be part of the math module. And the only problem or difference with the math module is that you need to import math at the top of your program. So whenever you need to import stuff, you should do it at the top of your program. Because you want to import it before you try anything else so that everything you need is imported, and there are no errors because Python runs from top to bottom. So I'm going to import math. And then now to start using the math module after we imported it, every single command is going to be math dot, and then it's going to be like a keyword, like square root. And I'll show you guys in a second what that looks like. So the math dot square root is one of them. X equals math dot square root 64. Then it gives us 8.0. And if you know 8 squared is equal to 64, so that's correct. And hopefully you guys know what square root of 144 is. And it does give us the correct value of 12. And then there are just some more. So math.ceil. I don't know if you've seen the word ceiling, the word ceiling, or floor. Those are pretty common English words. And you can see math.ceil, it rounds a number always upwards. And math.floor is always going to round it downwards. And we can test this out. Math.ceil 1.4. And then y equals math.floor 1.4. Let's try printing out each of these. So remember, ceiling is if you look up, you can see the ceiling, or if you look down, you see the floor. So it makes sense that floor would be rounding down and ceiling would be rounding up. You can see x, which printed out first, is equal to 2, which is 1.4 rounded up. And then y is equal to 1 because 1.4 was rounded down. And finally, we have math.pi. So if we want the literal value of pi, we can get it using this. So it obviously has to round off at some point because pi is infinite. So it has infinite digits, and computers can't handle that many digits. So it's gonna cut it off at some point. And there's hundreds of more modules, functions that are available. So square root is one of them. Ceiling, floor, there are other ones. Math.pi is one of them. And if you want a full list, there's a full list on this website. I can link it in the general chat if you want. I just linked it. And then it has all the methods like inverse cosine, arc sine. And then it tells you what each of them do as well. So yeah, there's a lot of useful math functions on here and a lot of not useful stuff too. So yeah, that's basically it for the math part of Python. And we're going to move on to string formatting next. So string formatting is basically we're printing, but we're formatting it in our own way. So you can see the format method allows you to format selected parts of a string. So yeah, so there's sometimes parts of text that you can't control, like they come from a database or user input that we're like typing in. And to control these values, we're adding these curly braces in the strings. And then using the format method, we're replacing these curly braces with something else. So in this case, we have price equal to 49, and txt says the price is brackets dollars. So this is like a placeholder, and we're gonna fill in that placeholder when we say txt.format, open parentheses, price, close parentheses. So you're gonna see when I try running this, price equals 49, and then txt equals the price is curly brackets dollars. And then we want to print txt.format price. So again, this is like a placeholder, and we're trying to plug in this price into these placeholders. And once we run the code, you can see it says the price is $49 because we formatted it so that price would be plugged into these curly braces. And one thing that's I thought was pretty cool about this is you can actually format the price so that it displays a number specifically with 2 decimals every time. So if I have the number 49 and I wanted to do 2 decimals, I can do this right here. So this decimal tells us that it's going to be a decimal. This 2 tells us how many places it's going to be, so 2 decimal places. And this F is just saying that it's a float, because floats are decimals. And if I try running this, it says the price is $49.00. And I thought this was really cool because it always is going to give us 2 decimal places, even if I do 1, 2, 3. It's not going to give us an error. It's not going to give us anything like that. It's just going to cut this 3 off and give us only 2 decimal places. And even if we have 1 decimal place, it automatically is going to complete that second decimal place with a 0. So this can be really useful so especially the American currency, it's in dollars and cents, and it's always the cents are in 2 decimal places. So it can be helpful for that. And then you can also do multiple values for this formatting. So if I had 3 things I wanted to plug in, I can have 3 curly braces, and for one of them I can even have this 2 decimal place. And then in the format, I'm gonna have quantity, item no, price. We're plugging each of these in, and then they're just gonna plug into the same order. So 3 would go in here, 567 would go in here, and 49 would go in here. And obviously it would be decimal formatted to 2 places. So it'd be 49.00. So let's try to recreate this. First, we need the quantity. Quantity is 3. And then item number is 567. And then we have my order. My order is equal to. So I want blank pieces of item number blank for And this one's not just going to be a regular blank. We're going to do the colon dot to f. And this is just showing us that, of course, it's going to be a decimal. So we want a decimal, and then it's up to 2 decimal places. And then it's a float with that f, and then dollars, period, to finish it off. Then I'm going to, in the print statement, say my order dot format. And let's see, we want quantity to be in here, item number to be in here, and price to be in here. So we would put that in that exact order. Item, NO, price. And now if we try running it, I want 3 pieces of item number 567 for $49.00. So it looks like that worked correctly. And then I think you guys remember how list indices work, hopefully. So you can also use index numbers for this dot formatting system. And just like a list, it's always going to start at index value 0. So quantity would be 0, item number would be 1, and price would be 2. So then instead of putting nothing in these curly brackets, I can put the number, and this number corresponds to quantity, 1 corresponds to item number, and 2 corresponds to price. So you can kind of pick, what the order is, so you don't have to worry about like, oh, it's in the wrong order. Like you can just pick the order that you want it in. So to test that out, we can just change these to 0, or we can just add a 0, 1, and 2. And then if I run it, it's going to be exactly the same. But I'm going to try switching it a little so you guys can see the difference. So now item number is index 0, right? And then quantity is index 1 and price is index 2. So price is going to remain the same. It's still going to be $49.00. But this time quantity is going to be the new item number basically, and item number is going to be like the new quantity. So if I run it, you can see that item number instead is at this place right here at 567, and quantity is now at the item number place. So item number 3 now instead of 567 that it was previously. And so yeah, you can use index numbers for dot formatting. And then also with these index values, you can use them more than once. So if I wanted to have the same, I don't know why you would ever have the same item number and quantity, but I want, and then you want to plug in quantity, the variable quantity for both of these values. You can put both of them the same index value, and it'll give you the same value. And you can also look at this example if you want. So age would be used once right here, and then name would be used twice. So his name is John. John is 36 years old is what it would print. And then you can also have the like a variable creation, kind of like a parameter. And so you can see this person, he wants to use Ford as his value, but he named he created a variable called car name, and you can use these variable names kind of like an index value, as you saw before, and you can see car name and model are both being used like that. So this is, I think, the last thing we'll do, but we can try testing this out. I have and then car name, and then it is a model, period. Then now let's do the printing part of it. So dot format. And this time, remember we're using car name and model as our index values. So we need to declare them like this. Car name is equal to Ford. And then the model is equal to Mustang. And now when we print it, it says, I have a Ford, it is a Mustang. So we're essentially replacing car name with whatever it's equal to in the formatting part, and model with whatever it's equal to. So hopefully that all made sense. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask at any time. And we'll try to answer. And I'm going to pass it on to Serena, who's going to tell you guys what the homework is for today.
Okay, so for today's homework, you guys are going to finish the rest of the tests that I went over with you guys today. So that's questions 21 to 40. And if you hadn't completed it before, like up to 20, try to do that as well. And then I also have a fun project for you guys, and you guys can read it and try to solve it. And we'll probably solve it together as well if you guys have questions tomorrow. So you guys can go ahead and try to do that. It's like finding the hidden word. So yeah, you guys can have fun and try that. And I'll send it in the homework channel as well. And other than that, we are done. So we'll see you guys tomorrow. Thank you guys for coming. Bye.
Bye.